April 18, 1942. Just after dawn. The skies over Tokyo. The city is waking slowly. Factory whistles have not yet sounded. Trams roll through narrow streets still wrapped in early spring mist. On rooftops and balconies, laundry stirs faintly in the breeze. For months, the war has felt far away here. Something happening across oceans and islands whose names most civilians will never see. Japan is winning. That is what the newspapers say. That is what the radio repeats every morning. Pearl Harbor. Hong Kong. Singapore. The Philippines. A cascade of victories, each one reinforcing the belief that the home islands are beyond reach. Protected by distance. Protected by the Navy. Protected by destiny. Then, faintly at first, comes a sound that does not belong. High above the city, engines hum low, steady, unfamiliar. They are not Japanese engines. Air raid wardens hesitate. Radar stations, still primitive and incomplete, register nothing useful. Anti-aircraft crews are unprepared. No alarms sound. There is no warning because no one truly believes this is possible. Moments later, dark shapes break through the clouds. Twin engines. Broad wings. American aircraft. Bombs fall. Not many. Not enough to cripple factories or destroy the city, but enough to shatter something far more important. Certainty. Explosions ripple through industrial districts and residential neighborhoods alike. Windows shatter. Fires ignite. Civilians scatter in confusion, not fear. Yet, the fear comes later, when the question forms in every mind at once. How did they get here? For Japan's leadership, the shock is immediate and visceral. This is not supposed to happen. The Imperial Japanese Navy exists to prevent exactly this moment. The Pacific perimeter was meant to push the enemy thousands of miles from the home islands. The United States was meant to be stunned, demoralized, and negotiating by now. Instead, American bombers are over Tokyo. Inside naval headquarters, reports arrive fragmented and contradictory. Some officers assume the aircraft must have launched from bases in China. Others suspect a carrier raid, but dismiss it as impossible. U.S. carriers, they believe, are either damaged or hiding far from Japanese waters. Yet the evidence is undeniable. American planes have struck Japan itself. Among those who understand the implications immediately is Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. For years, Yamamoto has warned that a war with the United States cannot be won quickly, or at all, if it becomes a contest of industry. He knows American shipyards, factories, and training pipelines. He has seen them firsthand. He has argued, repeatedly, that Japan can only hope to strike hard, strike fast, and force a settlement before American production awakens. The Doolittle Raid tells him that awakening has already begun. The physical damage is limited. Japanese censors will ensure the public never fully understands what happened. Newspapers minimize the raid. Casualties are downplayed. Responsibility is blurred. But within the Navy, there is no hiding the truth. If American bombers can reach Tokyo in April 1942, then Japan's defensive assumptions are wrong. Fundamentally wrong. Anger follows shock. How could the enemy slip through? Why were no carriers detected? Who failed? Blame spreads quickly, especially toward naval aviation commanders and intelligence officers. Air defense units are reprimanded. Patrol zones are expanded. New orders are issued demanding vigilance that had seemed unnecessary just days before. Yet beneath the anger lies something far more dangerous. Fear. The raid exposes more than a gap in defenses. It reveals a gap in time. Japan has achieved stunning victories, but it has not destroyed America's ability to fight. The United States is not retreating into isolation. It is adapting, learning, testing reach and resolve. And it is only April. Within days, strategic debates intensify. If American carriers launch these bombers, then those carriers must be found and destroyed. Immediately, before they strike again. Before America's industrial power fully translates into fleets and squadrons that Japan cannot hope to match. For Yamamoto, the conclusion is unavoidable. The war has entered a new phase, and Japan must force a decisive battle now. The Doolittle Raid will soon fade from public discussion inside Japan. Its craters will be filled, its fires extinguished, its memory officially minimized. But among Japan's senior naval officers, it will never be forgotten. Because on that quiet April morning, Japan realizes something terrifying. The United States is not beaten. It is only getting started. Late April 1942, Tokyo. Naval General Staff Headquarters. The meetings are tense. Voices are controlled, but the stakes are unmistakable. Maps are unrolled across long tables. Red pins mark American advances. Blue arcs trace Japanese patrol zones that should have been impenetrable. Somewhere between them lies an answer no one wants to say aloud. The home islands are not safe. For years, Japanese naval doctrine has rested on distance. The Pacific itself was a defensive moat, vast, unforgiving, and controlled by the Imperial Navy. Any enemy force would be detected, tracked, and destroyed long before it approached Japan. The Doolittle Raid proves that doctrine incomplete. Not wrong in theory, but insufficient in practice. Investigations begin immediately. Intelligence officers reconstruct the raid's path. Carrier patrol lines are reviewed. Submarine pickets are questioned. Each layer of defense is examined and found wanting. American carriers had approached closer than expected. Detection had come too late. Response had been fragmented. What alarms planners most is not the failure itself, but how quietly it happened. Admiral Yamamoto presses his argument with renewed urgency. He does not dwell on embarrassment. He speaks of arithmetic. America, he reminds them, can build ships faster than Japan can sink them if given time. The raid is proof that American initiative is accelerating. What began as defense is turning into offense. If Japan waits, it will lose. Within the Naval General Staff, resistance remains. Some officers argue the raid was a fluke, propaganda stunt, militarily insignificant. They point out that no factories were destroyed, no fleets damaged, no ports crippled. Yamamoto does not dispute this. That is precisely the problem. The raid's significance lies not in what it destroyed, but in what it revealed. American reach, American audacity, American confidence. These bombers did not come to win a battle. They came to send a message, and the message was received. Strategic priorities shift almost overnight. The perimeter must be extended farther east. American carriers must be lured into battle. A decisive engagement, Kantai-Kessen, must annihilate U.S. naval power before American industry can fully mobilize. Midway emerges as the focal point, an island outpost, a trap, a baited hook designed to force the U.S. Navy into committing its remaining carriers. Yamamoto knows the plan is risky, but risk now seems preferable to delay. The urgency created by the Doolittle Raid compresses decision-making. Timelines shorten, assumptions harden. There is less room for dissent, less patience for caution. Orders are issued, plans are finalized. The fleet prepares. Yet even as preparations accelerate, cracks remain. Reconnaissance coverage is stretched thin. Carrier coordination is complex. Intelligence on American capabilities remains incomplete. Japanese doctrine still assumes the enemy will behave predictably, drawn into battle by honor, pressure, or pride. The Americans, meanwhile, are already thinking differently. In Washington and Pearl Harbor, the raid has served its own purpose. It has boosted morale. It has demonstrated reach. But more importantly, it has provoked Japan into accelerating exactly the kind of battle American codebreakers and planners are preparing for. Midway is coming, and both sides believe time is on their side. The Doolittle Raid was meant to sting. Instead, it becomes the spark that drives Japan toward a gamble it cannot afford to lose. Because from this moment on, the Pacific War is no longer about conquest. It is about who can end it first. May 1942. The waters stretching from Japan to Midway Atoll. Orders ripple outward from Tokyo like shockwaves.
Carrier division sortie.
Battleships raise steam. Submarines fan out along expected American approach routes. The Imperial Japanese Navy is committing its most powerful force yet, not to conquer territory, but to erase a threat. Midway is chosen with care. What the plan does not account for is how much the Americans already know. In the weeks since the Doolittle Raid, Japanese radio traffic has surged. Orders, adjustments, and preparations generate patterns. American codebreakers at Station HYPO in Pearl Harbor sift through fragments, filling gaps, testing hypotheses. AF is running low on water. A simple ruse confirms it. Midway, for Admiral Yamamoto, speed is essential. Every delay favors American shipyards. Every month brings new carriers closer to completion. The Doolittle Raid has compressed the timeline. There will be no waiting for perfect conditions. He accepts the risks. Others accept them too. Some reluctantly, some eagerly, few with full understanding of what is at stake. On Japanese carriers, air crews prepare with confidence born of experience. These are veterans of Pearl Harbor, the Indian Ocean, the early Pacific victories. They trust their training, their commanders, and their aircraft. They believe the Americans will come as expected, as planned. They do not know that the trap has been reversed. The operation unfolds with meticulous precision. On paper, Midway is bombed. Reports indicate damage, but not destruction. Nagumo hesitates. Should he rearm for a second strike? Or prepare for the American carrier's intelligence insists may be nearby? Minutes pass. Decks fill with fueled aircraft. Bombs and torpedoes lie exposed. Fighters circle overhead. And then, from the clouds, American dive bombers appear. In less than 5 minutes, Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu are mortally wounded. Fire spreads uncontrollably. Ordnance detonates. Damage control teams fight a losing battle against heat, smoke, and chaos. The carriers that defined Japan's early victories become infernos. For those who survive, the realization is immediate and devastating. The gamble has failed. Hiryu strikes back, damaging American carriers, but the balance is already lost. By nightfall, Japan's carrier force lies shattered. The pilots who cannot be replaced are dead. The ships that cannot be rebuilt quickly are sinking. The decisive battle Yamamoto sought has come, and it has gone the wrong way. In Tokyo, the news is filtered, delayed, softened. But within naval circles, the truth spreads quickly. The Doolittle Raid did not just provoke a response. It forced Japan into a battle it could not win. Midway is not the end of the war, but it is the end of Japan's strategic initiative. From this point forward, the Imperial Navy will fight defensively, reactively, always short of time, pilots, and ships. And the Americans will advance. The collision Yamamoto feared and tried to control has occurred. The war has become a contest Japan cannot escape. August 1942. The Solomon Islands. Guadalcanal. The first American amphibious landings in the Pacific strike a nerve that still throbs from Midway. For Japanese commanders, this is the nightmare scenario the Doolittle Raid hinted at and Midway confirmed. The United States is not content to raid or threaten. It is advancing methodically, relentlessly toward Japan's defensive perimeter. Guadalcanal is not a grand objective on paper. It is remote, underdeveloped, and plagued by disease. But its airfield, soon known as Henderson Field, changes everything. Whoever controls it controls the skies and sea lanes across the southern Solomons. Japan cannot allow that. What follows is not a single battle, but a grinding campaign that exposes the full consequences of the Doolittle Raid's strategic aftershocks. Japanese planners had expected time to consolidate. Instead, they are forced into repeated counterattacks with inadequate preparation. Troops are rushed forward without sufficient supplies. Naval forces operate under constant threat from American aircraft based ashore, an operational reality Japan had underestimated. Night after night, destroyers race down the slot to deliver men and material in what becomes known as the Tokyo Express. Speed replaces security. Losses mount. The raid that once seemed symbolic now reveals its deeper meaning. America's reach has become permanent. Within Japan's high command, frustration grows. The decisive battle doctrine is failing again, not because Japanese soldiers lack courage, but because the conditions no longer allow for decisive blows. American forces absorb punishment, replace losses, and return stronger. Guadalcanal becomes a war of attrition, and Japan cannot win wars of attrition. Admiral Yamamoto watches the campaign unfold with grim recognition. The strategic tempo has shifted permanently. Every operation now feels reactive. Every success temporary. The Americans dictate where and when to fight. The Doolittle Raid had exposed vulnerability. Midway had destroyed the tool meant to restore balance. Guadalcanal proves that the United States will exploit both relentlessly. Japanese soldiers on Guadalcanal experience the consequences directly. Supply shortages become catastrophic. Food runs out. Disease spreads. Men weaken, then starve. Attacks are launched not because they are likely to succeed, but because surrender is unthinkable. Survivors later describe Guadalcanal as a place where the war stripped away all illusions. Victory speeches meant nothing. Strategy felt distant. Survival became the only objective. By February 1943, Japan evacuates the island. The decision is pragmatic and devastating. For the first time, Japan has not only been stopped, it has been pushed back. Looking backward, the chain becomes unmistakable. The Doolittle Raid did not destroy Japan's cities. It destroyed Japan's certainty. It forced urgency where patience might have delayed disaster. It accelerated decisions that led to Midway. It turned a war of expansion into a war of survival. Guadalcanal is the proof. The United States has moved from raiding to occupying, from testing to committing. The Pacific War is no longer a series of lightning strikes. It is now a long, grinding struggle, one Japan lacks the resources to sustain. And it began, in many ways, with a handful of American bombers over Tokyo. 1943 and beyond. Tokyo. A war measured in factories, not victories. In the months after Guadalcanal, Japanese strategic thinking hardens into something grim and defensive. The language changes. Where once there had been confidence in decisive battles, there are now discussions of delay, attrition, and endurance. The Doolittle Raid is no longer mentioned publicly. But inside naval planning rooms and postwar memoirs, it returns again and again, not as a tactical event, but as a psychological rupture. It was the first unmistakable signal that the war Japan envisioned did not exist. Japanese officers begin to describe the conflict in new terms. They speak of American capacity rather than American skill, of production curves instead of battle plans, of an enemy whose strength does not peak with a victory, but grows stronger with time. This is precisely what Yamamoto had feared, and precisely what the raid confirmed. From 1943 onward, the Imperial Navy fights with increasing awareness of its limitations. Losses cannot be replaced at the same pace. Pilots cannot be trained to veteran standards quickly enough. Ships take too long to build, too long to repair. Every engagement now carries a question that did not exist before April 1942. What happens if this does not end soon? The answer becomes painfully clear. American shipyards launch carriers at a pace Japan cannot match. Aircraft roll off assembly lines in numbers that defy comparison. Training pipelines expand rather than contract. Losses are absorbed. Japan, by contrast, fights a narrowing war. Fuel shortages worsen. Raw materials grow scarce. Strategic options collapse inward. The Doolittle Raid had exposed a vulnerability. Time now exploits it. In post-war testimony, Japanese naval officers are strikingly candid. Many admit that Midway and Guadalcanal were not isolated disasters, but consequences of a deeper miscalculation, underestimating the speed and scale of American mobilization. And the moment that miscalculation became undeniable was not Pearl Harbor's aftermath. It was the day American bombers appeared over Tokyo. The raid forced Japan to act before it was ready. It accelerated risk. It narrowed options. It pushed the war onto a path where Japan's strengths, skill, daring, doctrine, could not compensate for what it lacked. Industry, time, depth. For the United States, the Doolittle Raid was never about damage. It was about direction. It signaled intent, provoked response. It revealed how the enemy thought and how it might be forced to move. From that moment on, the Pacific War became a contest Japan could not avoid and could not win. The empire that had seemed unstoppable in early 1942 did not collapse overnight. But it was the steady hum of American engines over a city that believed itself untouchable.